Zuerst möchte ich sagen, meine Eltern sind von Remscheid und St. Georgen im Schwarzwald, aber sie haben überzogen in 1932 und wir haben zu Hause Deutsch gesprochen, aber nur bis 1941 dafür. Mein Deutsch geht nicht so gut. Aber der Studer hat mir gesagt, dass Sie verstehen, alle verstehen Englisch perfekt, richtig? Gut, dann spreche ich jetzt in English. I'd like to say to you that the problem that we're seeing all over the world in finance, including here in Switzerland, definitely started in America. I'm embarrassed to have to stand here before you and tell you that if you want to know who is guilty, the answer is we are. But the reason, what I would like to do, since I know you are all students of culture, is to point out that the problems that we're having have to do with American attitudes toward housing. If you go all the way back in our history to the time when the Europeans first came to America and we began to live there, it was our custom to help each other build a house. Without a bank, just all get together and we would go out in the Wald, we go in the forest and we chop down the trees and we help each other build a house. This was always part of our culture. As a result, today we have 2 out of 3, das heißt 67% von Amerikanern haben ihre eigenen Häuser, nicht wahr? Here it's 45%, or in Germany 45%. And we have this very strong idea that everybody should have their own house, even if they're only 25 Jahre alt. Okay? And this goes way back in our history. To come forward quickly to the 21st century, one of our former presidents, Jimmy Carter, heißt der, he has a program called Habitat for Humanity, where even today in America, we help each other build a house, okay? And we contribute our labor, he contributes his labor, right? And everybody should have their own house. Unfortunately, as our country's history evolved, the way we went about financing houses changed. So that after we went from the Atlantic Ocean all the way across America to the Pacific Ocean, we would, on the frontier, we would help each other build a house, but in the cities behind the frontier, at first, we had all local institutions would help with the money. It would be what you call a Sparkassen, a savings bank, or a small bank. You go get your loan, they give you the money, you build the house, and they keep the loan in the bank where it began, okay? Over the years, this system began to change so that if we then jump ahead to the Zweiter Weltkrieg, to the 1940s, during the war, in America, we had 16 million men and women in the armed forces during the Second World War, fighting here in Europe and in Japan and so on. And after the war, we went from 16 million to 2 million in less than a year. And so we had 14 million, mostly young men, come back to America from Europe, from Japan, and they had not seen any women for 5 years. And this created a sexische Problem. And from that came what we called a baby boom, okay? And we had the baby boomers, 76 Millionen, 76 million baby boomers, starting with Willie Clinton and George Bush, 1946 geboren. And at the end of the war, we decided, because they had served their country so well, that they should be able to have a house with the government's help, okay? We call it the GI Bill for the veterans. And they could buy a house with no down payment, and the government would guarantee the bank that the loan would be paid. This eventually became a problem in our country, but at first it was not a problem because the bank that made the 100% loan kept the loan in the bank, and they still had to collect. And they did proper, what we call Unterschriften underwriting. You have to have a job. You have to have some savings. You have to buy a house that you can afford to pay for, and so on. And this went on that way mostly through the 1950s and the 1960s. And the conventional way that you paid for your house was with, if you were not a veteran, not from the war, you got what we call a 30-year conventional mortgage with 20% down payment and 80% loan, okay, for 30 years, 30 jaar. And this was a very safe process because you were looked at very carefully. Do you have a good job? Do you have the 20% down payment, and so on? All of this began to change in the 1970s when we had the inflation that was caused by OPEC, the oil inflation in the 1970s. Interest rates went way up, and so we began to invent new types of mortgages with adjustable rates and variable rates, where instead of paying 6% for 30 jaar, 6% for 30 years, you begin with 5%, and then next year it can be a little higher or a little lower depending on the level of interest rates in the market. That worked okay also for most people, although it began to put homeowners in a position of danger when interest rates rose because they had to pay more, okay? Then the next thing that happened was we began to see the creation of what we call the secondary market, where the institution that made the mortgage would package it together with other mortgages in what we call a mortgage-backed security, an asset-backed security. And it would then go to various secondary market institutions. You heard Dr. Studer mention the two worst ones in our history are called Fannie Mae, Federal National Mortgage Association, and Freddie Mac, Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corp. These are komische businesses, because they are theoretically owned by the stockholders, but the government guarantees that if you lend the money, you will get it back. So we call this a government-sponsored entity. And because they have the Treasury of the United States guaranteeing them that the money will be paid back if necessary, they have an advantage in raising money against private corporations doing the same thing. And so they began to grow and grow and grow. And eventually they became the two biggest mortgage companies in ganze Welt, in the whole world, okay? And unfortunately, because of our heritage and culture of favoring home ownership, our politicians in Washington, especially the politicians from linke Seite, the Democrats, okay, said to Fannie and Freddie, hör mal, listen, you know, we have a lot of Americans who are less fortunate than other Americans, and everybody in America should have a house. That's always the way we have done it. Therefore, we would like for you to make the rules a little easier. No down payment. You tell me, if I am the bank, I ask you how much income do you make? And then whatever you say, I write it down without checking. I ask, where do you work? And then I write that down, and I don't see if you actually work there. These we call subprime mortgages, okay? Komische mortgages. Another one we called alternative A. They're called liar loans, because everybody knows you were lying when you said how much money you make. And everybody, of course, in America wants to have a bigger house than the neighbor, the Nachbarn. Mein Haus soll größer sein wie Ihre Häuser, nicht wahr? Das ist eine amerikanische Idee. Und dafür haben wir die größte Häuser in ganzer Welt. Unfortunate thing is, people were buying houses more expensive and bigger than they could really afford. And every year, house prices were going up by 5%, 5%, 10%, kein Problem, right? No down payment. Next year, 5% higher is okay. Year after that, 10% higher, okay. All right, you see the picture? So, then what happened was the people who made these mortgages, we started then having a group of people called mortgage brokers who did not work for a bank, and they had no ability to actually put the money for a mortgage, but they would be paid a fee if they could find the person to take to the bank. And so their only interest was in getting you to the bank that will make you the mortgage. Follow? And they made fees from that. The bank would then put the money up for the mortgage, even though the person coming in had not enough income, no down payment, etc. And the reason the bank would do it is because they could then put it in a package, in a box, and send it to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, okay? And the bank would still collect the payments monthly, monatlich, and they get paid a fee for collecting the payments, so it's a good business. The risk goes to Fannie Mae, I make the money collecting the bills. You follow that? Good. Okay, then Fannie Mae, so by this point, at this point, if I am the homeowner, the person I met for the mortgage broker, gone. The bank that put up the money is gone. The mortgages from the bank have gone to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they are now in a package there. Next comes Wall Street, okay? Then we take those packages of mortgages from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we ship them to Wall Street, where they will then package them up with other things, with loans that are subprime loans and alternate liar loans. They put them in a box, and they sell them everywhere in the world, including here in Switzerland. Every bank in Iceland, all three of them, failed, kaput. In Ireland, Germans have problems with them, as you will hear from Manfred, and so on. And so we spread this, we call these toxic assets, okay? And the toxic asset is the American mortgages in the box, all right? Everything went fine, and the problem became one that, listening to the politicians, the people at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and also other organizations like the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, which is literally owned by the government, they all lowered their standards for what you must do in order to get a house, okay? And the quality of the loans became worse and worse and worse. Then Wall Street would package these up into what they call collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, or something exotic called structured investment vehicles, okay? And this companies on Wall Street, the 5 big ones, like Merrill Lynch and Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, et cetera, would hold these on their balance sheet until they could put packages together, and they would have in this package 30-year loans, but the money they used to keep that package was every night it had to be renewed. Every night. So you have a 30-year loan with overnight money. You see, we call this an interest rate mismatch among us professors, right? And one day, all of a sudden, it began, the American people who had these subprime mortgages at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac couldn't make their payments anymore once house prices started to come down and the recession began. And so all of a sudden, the money wasn't coming in anymore. And people became very worried about what is in this package, okay, and how do I get my money back? Now, there is a great story in the Wall Street Journal about not only did the 3 biggest banks in Iceland all fail, but there's a little village 30 miles, das heißt 50 Kilometer aus the main city, where the city fathers had put all their money into this, and they're now in the remote area of Iceland. The whole town is ruined by American mortgages, okay? And this process has now spread all over the world, and it starts from what we call in America the Amerikanische how do you say, dream? Traum, yeah, the American dream. The American dream has now become the world's nightmare, right? Because this money is not flowing, and all over the world, people are unable to connect. Now, if you own or your bank owns some of this toxic stuff, you are 6 steps misconnected to the person who owes the money. You see what I mean? Through this very elaborate process. And this process has now completely broken down. It's ganz kaputt. Therefore, the world is now suffering from this housing created nightmare pushed by the government of the United States, pushed by the politicians who encouraged Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and also Privatbanken to lower their standards and make loans to people who could not afford to pay them, okay? The government pushed that hard because they say, hey, it's the American dream. Everybody should have a house, all right? And with good intentions, we got bad results, all right? And this is now spread all over the world. So that now brings me to the question of, okay, here we are. Here in Switzerland, for example, I understand there's someone here from UBS, United Bank of Switzerland. That's my bank in America. I bank with them, okay? The Swiss Central Bank had to give them 6 billion Swiss francs in order to bail them out because they own stuff like that here in Switzerland, you know, in Iceland, in Italy, in Germany, in France, in Ireland, everywhere in the world this is going on, all right?
40 billion. 40, not 6.
Yeah,
40 billion.
Wall Street Journal said 6 billion.
Yeah, you should read the right newspaper.
Yeah, that's your newspaper. You'll have to send me a copy. Woo. You say 40? 40, 40. Oh, woo. Big dollars. When you divide that by, there are 7 million people live in Switzerland, right? 7.4 million. Divided by 4 million is that, how much is that? 5,600 per person here. And the same thing is happening to us in America. In the first 3 months of this year, January, February, and March, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac each lost between 25 and 30 billion dollars in 90 days. Das heißt 1/3 Billion every day. pro Tag, nicht wahr? Okay? And it continues to build up. So the question is, what should we now do with this? And as you may know, I used to be a member of the Federal Open Market Committee that, under a man named Volcker, Paul Volcker, in the 1980s. And he's now over 80 years old, and he's trying to help figure out what we should do to make up for the problems you spoke about of Greenspan. We call him Greenspin. And to solve the problem. And obviously what we need to do, we had all 5 of our big Wall Street firms failed, okay? Or had to change to banks. Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns were forced into a marriage, right? And the other 3, Morgan Stanley and so on, became banks with the help of the government. So that business of packaging this stuff up and sending it off has, at least for now, stopped. So the question then is, what do we need to do going forward? Our government has suddenly decided that there are a long list of companies that we call too big to fail, right? Too gross, too unterfallen, yeah, too big to fail, including the biggest insurance company in the world, AIG. We never knew that our government was standing behind that company. So far, it has cost the American taxpayers about $200 billion to keep it going, and it's losing money every day, okay? I think one thing we need to do is say to our government, look, if you're going to come up with this list of companies that are too big to fail, then either we have to fix it so they can't be so big, okay, without capital. All of these companies, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, were operating with in a capitalist society. In a capitalist society, you're supposed to have capital, nicht wahr? They had 2% capital. That means for every $1 of capital, they put $50 of stuff, including this toxic stuff, okay? The banks in America have 8% capital, which means they can only put $12.50 of assets on each dollar of capital, but the investment banks and AIG and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac both had 50-to-1 leverage, less than 2% capital in these government-sponsored entities. And you know what they do now? Now, our government has turned to them and said, you need to solve the problem, and we're going to make you bigger. Bigger. This company run by a bunch of dummkopf, you know? And we're going to make it bigger, and they are going to be part of the solution to the problem. And part of the solution is we're going to say to every homeowner who can't make the payment, okay, that we are going to lower the amount you owe, lower the interest rate, or make the period you owe the money longer, all right? We've done this with, 2 or 3 million people already, and the ones who, even after they get it lowered, about 1/3 of them fail again to make their payments. So the problem goes on and on and on. And the government's solution is, in my mind, to make the problem worse by taking these 2 horrible companies that should never have been allowed to get so big, and they should be put on a track where they will be put out of business, slowly but surely. We can't afford to shoot them right now because they're the 2 biggest mortgage companies in the world, okay? But we do need to make them smaller. That's not where our government is going. Our government is making them bigger, okay? We also need to be careful that if we are going to name more and more companies that aren't even banks, too big to fail, or in the case of AIG, too integrated to fail, too, how do you say, interconnected, too interconnected to fail, then we need to say if that is a company that taxpayers are going to have to pay for, they should then be regulated like a bank. And they should have to have honest managers, capital underneath the bank, right? and so on. Or we need to fix the rules so that they can't get big without capital. If we're going to have a capitalist company, it has to have capital, okay? And that is sort of where we are today in the world, and I hate as an American to have to stand in front of you and with your some of your own banks being ruined as a result of this, to say that this is our problem. And what I hope I've clarified for you this evening is a bit of an understanding of how this came to pass and how it initially is consistent with our culture of wanting everyone to have a house. That's a nice thing, okay, especially if you help each other build it. But when it gets to the point where you let people have houses that are too big, too expensive, and they can't afford, you're not doing them a favor. You are hurting them, okay? Right now, we are having what we call foreclosures, where we kick you out of the house by the millions, okay? And what started out was a nice idea to help people is making their lives worse, okay? Because of our politicians who don't understand that you need to do what my father taught me as a young boy, you know. He taught me that before you, I should tell you a quick story about my father from St. Georgen and Schwarzwald. When I was 9 years old, I said to him, "Papa, it's time for you to give me an allowance," right? And he says to me, "What's that?" I said, "You know, that's when you give me the money for ice cream and for going to the movies." He says, "Oh, okay." He says, "Samstag um 6 Uhr kommen deine alte Kleider und dann wir gehen zu arbeiten, holen ihre Allowance." Und dann nehmen wir auf das Gebiet, hat gearbeitet, a tree nursery, we say, how do you say that? A nursery, a tree nursery. They verkaufen Bäume and so on. Yeah. And this was in 1944 or 45. And he walks me up to a very large heap of, how do you say, Kuhmist? He says, "Hier, ja, jetzt billig." Dort steht das Ding, richtig? 50 Cent per Stunde, nicht wahr? And that was my early training for an economist, right? I didn't know it then. And then at the end of the week, when we got paid in a little envelope, I would earn $3 or $4. He would open the envelope and say, "Here's your allowance, $1. And the rest went in the bank. And as a result, I am now a multimillionaire, okay, using German logic, okay. We have gotten away from that. It has hurt our country because we have given up on these values of common sense, individual behavior, common sense banking behavior, and as a result, we have spread all over the world this problem, which is still going to take some time to fix. And so with those brief remarks, I hope you were able to follow my logic, speaking in English. I would now like to, with your permission, Dr. Stu, to turn it over to my colleague, Manfred, who will give you the German update on how it looks to him, and he may not agree with everything I've said. So are you ready, Manfred? Good. Thank you.